Hi, Malcolm Graham Wood here, and I'm at Core Finance for my regular CEO interview. Today, my guest is Eytan Uliel, who is the CEO of Challenger Energy Group. Good morning, Eytan. Great to see you again.
Hi, Melky. Always wonderful to talk to you.
Great news. You've got a lot to talk about, and I'm really very pleased for you. So, just before we go into the most recent news, can you just give, for those people who might not know too much about it, where, what is in CEG now and a bit of an overview, please?
Sure. So Challenger Energy is I guess, junior AIM-listed energy company. The primary focus of the business, which really has been an evolving thing over the last few years, and I'm sure we'll speak mostly about, are our high-impact, high-value exploration blocks offshore Uruguay. We also have a small onshore producing business in Trinidad. We have some legacy assets, which long-standing followers of the company would be familiar with, in the Bahamas, some offshore exploration licenses there. And that's it. The rest of the portfolio has been cleaned up. But really, the entire focus of the business, all the value embedded in the business, is now in Uruguay.
Excellent. So let's start there. I think that would be a good thing to do. So you recently announced an amazing, to be honest, farm out, for which many congratulations.
Thank you.
Very pleased to see it happen, and never in doubt, mate, never in doubt. I would like to do Uruguay chronologically, if that's okay. So how did you get the licenses in the first place? What made you do it? And what did you see in Uruguay effectively before most people did?
Yeah, I mean, as all things in life, timing and foresight, ability to act quickly, and then sometimes you also have to just be a little bit lucky. As far as Uruguay is concerned, as people might remember, in 2019, this company was a sole purpose company focused on exploration activities in the Bahamas. And we were thinking, well, how do we diversify the business? How do we, plan for the next steps? Now, we had been looking around the Atlantic margin at various things. And there was the Uruguayan government were just about, after many years of inactivity, in late 2019, were just about to launch a new licensing round. And one of the blocks in particular, Area Off 1, was really interesting to us on a technical basis. Now, at that time, what was being marketed was the Antaya prospect, which is a very large, sort of shallow water prospect. We thought, this looks really interesting. But we, to be perfectly honest, just thought we're never going to pick up a license in Uruguay because all the others will be interested in it. And then what happened was COVID came along. So everyone scurried off to their bedrooms in their pajamas around the world, and as did we. And April of 2020 came around, and it turned out that nobody had registered to participate in the bidding round that was just opened in Uruguay. So we scrambled, we got ourselves pre-qualified, we put in a bid for the Area Off 1 license. And because nobody else was bidding, we put in an absolute minimum work program commitment, buy a few thousand kilometers of historic seismic, reprocess it, and that's it. And to our great joy, we were awarded that license effectively on an uncontested basis. We nipped in under the radar when nobody else was paying attention. Now, the thinking at that time, which again evolved, but the thinking at that time was essentially that there were things going on. We knew that there were wells going to be drilled in Namibia. We obviously didn't know how they were going to turn out. We knew that there was activity beginning to build in sort of Argentina and Brazil, but again, we didn't know how it would pan out. And the core license term in Uruguay was you get a 4-year initial exploration period. As I said, our minimum bid was to effectively do nothing. So the original plan in 2020 was, let's just pick up the license, kind of a land grab. We'll sit on it. We'll see what happens. It's an option. It really was viewed as a low-cost option at the time. And in some ways, it's an option that really paid off big time. Because essentially, as soon as we picked up the license, Uruguay went into lockdown for 2 years. Nothing happened there. finally, in May of 2022, so 2 years later, the president signed off and said, great, here's your license. And what had happened for us quite fortuitously was that in January of 2022, these mega discoveries were made in Namibia by Total and by Shell, and almost overnight transformed industry view of Uruguay, being the geological mirror of Namibia. And so all of a sudden, all the big guys start picking up licenses, piling into Uruguay, making big commitments. And we were then sitting on what is effectively one of the prime assets in Uruguay. So that's kind of the story of how we got there chronologically. To complete, because we now have 2 blocks in Uruguay, off 1 and off 3. So to complete the chronology for you, Melky, what then happened is, industry activity and interest in Uruguay kept building and building. Every other offshore block bar 1 got taken out in the space of 18 months by Shell, by Apache, by YPF. Offshore blocks in the southern waters of Brazil, in the Pelotas Basin, got taken out, etc. And there was 1 block left in Uruguay. And similar story, in May of last year, it became apparent that nobody else had registered to pick up that block, to bid for that block. We can speculate as why, but I always thought the most likely candidate for that was Shell, because they had picked up block 2 next door, but Shell had maxed themselves out. There are rules in Uruguay as to how much acreage you can have. So Shell had already maxed themselves out, so they couldn't. And again, maybe good luck, maybe good fortune, who knows, but nobody else had registered. And so again, we snuck in at the last minute. We put in another lowball offer, and we were awarded that block. And in the process, that was the final block in Uruguay to be licensed. So for the first time in its history, the entire offshore of Uruguay is now licensed, all to majors with the exception of Challenger. And we're, one of the biggest acreage holders in Uruguay now. So kind of that's how it all emerged.
Excellent. So my next question was going to say, what work did you have to do whilst getting the licenses, and after the licenses, what sort of relationship have you found with the ministry and the government? You've answered the first question, but you've done very little work. But
well, no. I mean, the thing that I said is that our minimum commitment was not very much, but through the course of 2022, when we saw all the emerging industry interest in Uruguay, we sort of established very early on, well, we have to change tack here. Just sitting on it for 4 years and doing nothing is not the right thing to do. If we want to attract a big name farming partner, you have to have something to show them. You have to have done some work. So, and the first question they always ask is, well, what's new? What new information do you have? So we decided, rather than just sitting on it, we would accelerate our work program and add in other stuff. And so we did all of the seismic reprocessing within 18 months rather than 4 years. The most important thing we did is we then subjected our reprocessed seismic lines to AVO analysis. So this is a technique used to identify structures. It is what all the discoveries in Namibia have been made on. The drilling there has all been drilling on AVO anomalies. Yeah. So we figured we need to do the same thing in Uruguay. We went and paid a fair amount of money to the consultants in Houston who had actually done a lot of the work in Namibia. So we knew we were getting good quality work. And it was that allowed us to identify 2 new prospects. And it was that accelerated body of work which then got sort of shopped effectively and resulted in the successful farm out. So, I mean, yeah, to your point, I mean, our work commitment was small, but we accelerated and we added to it. And it was through doing, what you might say, good, solid technical work that we were then able to, mature the block much quicker and get into a farm out much sooner.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And it took you to the next stage, which was the farm out process itself for one. So how did you go about that? I mean, yeah, obviously we knew then that the big boys were all hanging around and so on, and presumably you opened a data room and let the let the big chaps come in. But first of all, how did it go, the farm out process?
Well, it went well. I mean, the people who, follow the company and the public, I guess, retail shareholders who we're sort of talking to here, they seem to have this idea that you can like wave a magic wand and suddenly farm outs happen. These are enormously complicated, time-consuming processes. And you go through a period, the first thing that every big oil company wants to do is technical verification. So before you even start talking commercial terms, you don't get through the gate until they are 100% aligned with you in your technical view of the prospectivity. And as I say, we had front run that by doing a bunch of AVO work and being able to prove up a resource potential of several billion barrels, which makes it material, and it's in a good postcode and all of that stuff. But that sort of initial technical touchy-feely phase takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
And it was, so that was going on all through 2023. The other thing, I got roundly chastised because I promised everyone farm out by the end of last year. And instead of the end of last year, it got delayed a couple of months. Now, what really happened there is that all of the other license holders in Uruguay were waiting for their licenses to be formalized. And those licenses were only formalized at the beginning of December. It was a couple of months later than planned. And because it took until then, everybody was kind of waiting essentially for the starting gun to go off. And what they needed was to know who the other license holders were, when their work programs kicked in, so that the industry could get together and plan the multi-client 3D seismic that's going to follow, right? So it was really only in December of last year, so less than 3 or 4 months ago, that we finally sort of, if you like, got the green light. And then we were able to get into the real commercial nitty-gritty, and it took less than 3 months to reach an agreement with Chevron. But, the thing that everyone wants to know is, was there a contest? Yes. We had a lot of interest. We had a lot of people through the data room. We were not short of proposals. I mean, obviously, the Chevron proposal was a great one in terms of the financial metrics. But the other thing that was really, really important to us is that, we are going to be partners with these guys for a long time. So we wanted to make sure that the partnership dynamic was right, that, we're not going to get crushed as a junior company in all of this. And, I can say, hand on heart, the Chevron guys have been an absolute delight to work with so far. And were really, really, instilled in us a lot of confidence that they do the work as promised, they do it quickly, but, they'd respect the partnership, notwithstanding that we're the junior and they're the sort of global super. But the process went really well. The technical front part took a long time. The commercial, once you get through that, the commercial part's really not that complicated. You have a few variables to sort out and a few agreements to, which are pretty much off the shelf.
Okay. So my next question is about the deal in some sort of a bit more detail. You've sort of answered a bit of it, but I would like you to go through, how you structured the deal, and the cash and the carry and so on, and how that works for you. Importantly, I think that you've kept, like a really meaningful amount of the license of the block to yourselves, whereas, again, when you were being chastised for bits and pieces, there were people who were saying, oh, they're going to give it all away for a 5% stake or whatever. So what I'd like to do is maybe in a bit more detail, just go through the terms roughly, and that you can tell me, and the announced and so on,
sure.
And what you've kept and what role you're going to play going forward in this key block.
So, it's a very vanilla farming arrangement. As I say, the fundamentals of it kind of come off the shelf. So there are only usually 3 or 4 variables. First variable is we said we needed a material upfront cash payment. And as it turns out, we're getting $12.5 million cash on closing, which is a pretty good outcome, so that's number one. Number two was Chevron are taking a 60% stake in the block. We're retaining 40%, and Chevron will become the operator. That's relevant in two ways. One, as you point out, a 40% retained interest is a pretty good outcome, and it means we have a lot left for the future. Two, we have Chevron as our operator. I mean, they have global capability. They're gonna, they got to drill wells. They've got centers of excellence in Rio and Houston and all over. They can bring full muscle of a global super major to this project. And, the authorities in Uruguay are beyond delighted that Chevron are now entering Uruguay. Third, and this is the most important part, the whole reason for this farm out was we wanted to see an accelerated 3D seismic campaign underway. And so part of the agreement is Chevron will be doing everything they can to accelerate the campaign. In theory, we could see seismic as early as the end of this year or maybe early next year, and they will meet all of the costs of that. So they will cover our 40% share up to a $15 million cap, which means a gross seismic campaign value of about $37.5 million. Which is well within what the estimates would be. So, unless something goes horribly wrong, we don't have to pay anything through the seismic. And then the final element is that should Chevron decide to drill a well after shooting the seismic, and you would have to assume that they will if you see what's happened in Namibia, where they're drilling wells all the time now, they will carry half of our share of the well up to a cap of $20 million. So again, in theory, at a maximum well cost of $100 million, Chevron would pay their 60% and half of our 40%, and we'd have to fund $20 million on an initial well. I would say you can line up the metrics of this against just about any other farm-in done in the last 12 months, including farm-ins done in Namibia. Which, is the premier location, and these metrics are as good, if not better, than any of them. So we're very, very happy and proud of the deal we've done. To the final part of your question, I mean, the Uruguayan authorities are over the moon. There's a process now that'll take several months of, paperwork and legalities and, formal consents and what have you. But Chevron are one of the world's biggest oil companies. It represents a new country entry for them into Uruguay. So they did a lot of work to get to this place. And, and it really adds another feather in the Uruguayan cap. They now have Shell, they have Apache, they have Chevron, they have YPF, the Argentinian national oil company. So their patch is now filled with lots of very large companies, all committed to doing a lot of work, to accelerating seismic and to drilling wells.
Yeah, which is very, very good indeed. Before I go on to the natural move, which would take me to what's happening on OFF3,
yes,
I'd like it just to sort out the money question. You've received money up front. I know that the rest of the business wasn't consuming a huge amount of cash, but people will always want to know is, what does the balance sheet look like, and at a rate of burn that you might know, how long before you need more money?
Yeah, well, I mean, it just staggers me sometimes, the amount of obsession and, that people on the, again, in the retail space seem to have about this, and this constant prognostication that we're imminently going to do another raising and, imminently in need of money. And I don't understand why people can't actually look at what we say and take it at face value. So I'm the first to say, as we stand at the moment, we're not swimming in cash. We raised money more than almost 2 years ago now, and we've made that last. And we have cash sufficient to carry us through this farm out process, to closing of the farm out, assuming it doesn't drag on for forever. But if it closes in the next 2 or 3 months, as we expect, then we have sufficient cash to get us through that process. We run a very, very lean ship. Our monthly burn is less than $200,000 US. So, that's the immediate story. You know, we're not immediately in need of cash, and we're not immediately looking to do a placing or a raising. As soon as we close the deal with Chevron, we have $12.5 million in the bank. I told you we're running at a couple of $100,000 a month, so that, and we don't have to pay for anything more in Uruguay for the time being, other than work we do on Off3, which I'll come to. You know, but so we have many years ahead of us without actually needing to raise money. And then everyone, I was noticing on some of the chat boards, oh, well, yes, but one day a well will get drilled and they'll have to fund a drill. May that be our problem in 3 or 4 years from now. I mean, by then we could, yes, obviously raise more money, but presumably it would have to be at a massively improved value to where we are today. And the other thing that everyone seems to forget is we've retained 40% of the asset, and we are free to do a secondary farm down of that if we need to fund drilling, etc. 40% is a very large retained interest. If you look at what a bunch of people have done in Namibia, small junior companies, they've all got themselves into a position where they now fully carried through to development, through to first production, and they've managed to, in the end, retain 5, 6, 10% stakes. And that's the usual model for a junior company. So we start off with a huge retained interest that we were able to use to fund future capex if it's needed. So I'm not losing any sleep about this, and I don't know what the obsession with, you know, oh, there's imminently there's going to be this need for more money. I happen to be a large shareholder in the company. It is completely against my interests to needlessly dilute, you know, right? And so I said it at a function the other night. I will turn myself inside out and upside down to avoid having to raise more money. And as we stand at the moment, we don't have any plans or any need for it. And, you know, and that's, that's what we hope.
That is absolutely right. And there are two things I would like to say about that. One is you personally, and I've known you personally for a long time, have always been at the forefront of, when money was needed, to innovative, occasionally debt or a pref or whatever, in order to get you to do things rather than a hugely dilutive raise. And the second point is, which is much more important, don't read the boards.
Yes, I generally don't. I can't help myself sometimes because, you know, look, I'm a big believer that, you know, you've got shareholders, you should respect the shareholders, and you know, and all of them, the little ones, the big ones, they're all equally important. And, you know, you learn things sometimes when you read the boards. You learn what's concerning.
Yeah, I agree.
Sometimes irrationally so, as I feel it is in this case. And so maybe hopefully through, you know, just explaining it, I can dispense some of that paranoia people seem to have.
I'm very pleased that you've been able to do that today. So well done on that front. Let's cut to Off3, shall we?
Sure.
And it runs behind in chronological from the time you got awarded it and everything else. And talk us through it.
Well, the similar obligation there and similar commercial strategy, we're going to put our foot on the gas and actually accelerate our work program there. Now, Off3 is a little bit different to Off1. In some respects, it's better because Off3 between 2012 and 2016 was held by BP, and they already shot 3D seismic there. So there's no need to shoot new 3D. What you need to do is get your hands on the existing 3D, reprocess it, apply some new technologies and new, you know, AVO analysis, etc. But you can fast track Off3. And so our plan is to do all of that work in the next 6 to 9 months, ideally to complete it by the end of the year, but sometimes these things take a bit longer. And once we have that new body of technical information, just press repeat on what we did for Off1, which is run a formal farm out process and see what we can get. Now, the farm out there would be a similar sort of structure, but we're not interested in 3D seismic because we don't need it. So there, the focus of a farm out would be get us a well. Let's look at doing an initial exploration well sooner rather than later. And if everything kind of worked out as I'd like it to work out, we could actually wind up in a position where we have 2 partnerships, one for Off1, one for Off3, and with a well coming on both of those in the sort of 2027 timeframe. as well as wells that Apache are committed to drilling and work going on everywhere else. It makes Uruguay a really exciting place over the next few years.
And BP obliged to give you the seismic?
Well, it's not theirs. It actually belongs to the seismic contractor that shot it. And we're in a conversation about the basis on which we might be able to license it, or we can get it from ANCAP, the regulator. So we can get it. It's more just a question of cost. 3D being more expensive than 2D.
Yeah. So the timetable of this process for this farm out would lead you to being what, 1 year behind where you were on Off1, or?
Yeah, I mean, if everything worked out according to plan, we'd spend the balance of this year doing our technical work. We'd kick off a formal process, and hopefully we'd have a farm out partner in the bag sort of middle-ish of next year. Plus minus variations. The one thing that I can't predict is that Uruguay is really hot at the moment. There's nothing that says someone won't just come in preemptively and say, hey, some of the bigger players are really suffering from FOMO at the moment. And as I said, we had a lot of people in the Off1 data room. We weren't short of potential partnership options there. So it is not out of the question that someone preemptively, what's the line from The Godfather, makes us an offer we can't refuse. If that happens, great. But our core plan is really to follow the same methodology and strategy that applied to Off1 because it worked there. Do the same thing with Off3.
Yeah, and that sort of offer would just be saying, we're going to buy the 100%, here's the money on the table, and it would have to be a lot of money to do that.
Yeah.
Either that or a horse's head when you wake up in the bed in the morning.
Yeah, something like that.
Good. Well, I'm really pleased to see how well it's going. We've got such an exciting process over the next 12 to 15 months, but I'll come back to that in a second. But one thing I have to sort out is you mentioned very briefly at the beginning, quite rightly, that you have other assets in your portfolio. By the very nature of what's been going on here, they're small, but people will want to know, what's happening in Trinidad and the Bahamas, sticking or twisting or whatever. On that one, please.
Well, I mean, the most important thing is that, we've cleaned up all of that stuff and it really costs us nothing to own it. So it just sits there at the moment. Trinidad washes its face. It produces 300 barrels a day, churns along day in, day out. It's no longer central to anything. All the value here is in Uruguay. Now, we tried several iterations of how to improve the business in Trinidad. None of them worked. I'm the first to admit that we tried this and we drilled a well there, that didn't work. We tried some EOR techniques, that didn't work. And really, the thing in Trinidad is that you need scale. You need to have a bigger production base, given the fiscal terms, given the nature of production in that country. So our assets belong in some structure where you have greater scale. And now that I've got the farm out done with Chevron, and that was taking 99% of my attention. The attention over the next few months, we need to figure out a solution for Trinidad. How do we grow that business or get it in with other assets or do something that you can turn it from being a small production business that makes no money but doesn't lose money to being something better than small production business that makes a little bit of money. And and that will happen over the next few months, I hope. So that's Trinidad. As far as the Bahamas is concerned, again, we have the licenses. Immediately after completion of the well there, notwithstanding the well wasn't a commercial success, we applied for a renewal of those licenses because we still believe there is potential in those assets that we might be able to attract a partner for in the fullness of time. That hasn't gone anywhere. The government of the Bahamas has literally sat on it for 3.5 years now, and that is an untenable position as far as I'm concerned. So sometime over the course of this year, we need to somehow break that deadlock. And we're looking at various options. I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but it needs to be resolved. It can't just be a thing that sits there forever. But again, just to the core point, we have no obligations, no expenditure commitments. It's not taking up anything other than time and a bit of attention, but it needs to be resolved. We can't just leave it there forever.
Yeah, fair enough. Right, we're coming to the end.
Okay.
We've done a great dash so far. So the last question is always the same. I'm going to roll it up with another question, but basically saying the final question, which you will have answered in everything you've already said, but I'd like to conclude things, some sort of formality. I'd like to know where you think you would like to see Challenger in the next 12 to 18 months. You've explained it in some detail, and roll up with that. We've got news flow pretty much assured now for on and off over that 12 to 18 months. Just a quick roundup, please, on how you see it for next 18 to the end of next year.
So the next immediate thing is closing of the deal with Chevron. That will take a couple of months, 2, 3, 4 months. I can't predict because we need government approvals and there's a lot of procedural paperwork, but that's the next big thing, closing of the deal. Immediately after that, as I said, there's an accelerated seismic campaign coming up. So we start working with Chevron, they start talking to other industry participants, and hopefully we see 3D seismic happening towards the end of this year or early next year. That would mean middle of next year, you would see the results of that 3D seismic, and that would then lead into a decision on a well on OFF-1. And if everything went according to plan, that well would get drilled in 2027. So that's the sort of timeline of news for Area OFF-1. Area OFF-3, as I said, 6 months worth of hardcore technical work coming up. You'd see the results of that maybe end of the year, early next year. That kicks off a farm out process so that by the middle of next year, hopefully we've got a farm out partner. And again, that leads to potentially the drilling of a well middle of 2027. And sort of underneath that, you'll see a lot of activity in the region. So it's not just us. You'll see wells being drilled in Argentina, seismic activity all over Uruguay. Apache have a commitment to drill a well sometime in the next 3 years. So you'll see sort of industry activity, of course, whatever's happening in Namibia. So that kind of rounds out the news flow. From our point of view, there'll also be, as I said, some resolution with Trinidad, some resolution with the Bahamas. There are always business development opportunities. I've gone from being the leper to the most popular kid in the room in the space of 3 weeks since we announced the farm out. So everyone wants to talk now. Maybe we could look at doing this or that. So there are business development type opportunities we can look at as well. But where I'd like to see Challenger in 18 months is, solid progress on both of our core assets. So the OFF-3 block with new 3D seismic that's led to a well decision. OFF-1 block with new 3D led to a well decision. OFF-3, with solid technical work and a new partnership. And so, we're in a position where we're seeing a lot of activity and potentially a couple of wells happening in 2027. That would be an ideal outcome. And, that is a steady, measured way to build real value in the company over the next few years.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic. And not many people, when I ask them for 12 to 18 months, give me a 3-year plan. So it's even better. Eytan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great pleasure to see you again.
Thanks, Melky. Always a pleasure.
So I've been Malcolm Graham Wood doing my CEO interview with Core Finance. My guest today has been Eytan Uliel, who is the CEO of Challenger Energy Group. Thank you for joining us, Eytan. We wish you all the very best with such exciting prospects. And well done again on the Chevron deal. An absolute stormer. Well done. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye and see you next time. Bye now.